Hi folks, welcome back to Brew and Build. Today I'm going to be brewing a Centennial Pale Ale. This beer came about because I've got a large open bag of Centennial hops that really needs to be used. The bag's been sitting open in the freezer for quite a while, so I figured I'd use it all in a single hop pale ale. So then of course the question was what sort of pale ale to go for. Well, I love Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, so it made sense to model my recipe on that. Plus, Centennial hops are always touted as a super version of Cascade, so it should fit well with the Sierra Nevada recipe. Now, Sierra Nevada don't make it hard to brew their beer, and in fact, they even publish a recipe for a homebrew version of their pale ale. So the ingredients of my recipe are going to be no surprise. I'm going to start with 3.3 kilo of pale malt, and that'll be Hookhead pale malt from Minch Malts. Then I'll add 300 grams of crystal malt, and that'll be 60L crystal malt, and it's that sweet caramel and increased body that's going to offset the relatively large amount of hops and allow what is a slightly higher bitterness ale to become so drinkable. I'm gonna stray a little bit on the malt bill by adding another 200 grams of wheat malt to this. It'll add a little bit of richness, but it's really there just for a little bit of head retention as well. Then we come to the hopping schedule. At this point, I'm gonna say I'm not a big fan of high alpha citrus hops early in the boil. I find the bitterness a bit too sharp. So my way around that is mash hopping. I find I can get a smoother hop flavor and less bitterness this way. The downside, of course, is that I have to use a lot more hops to get the IBU that I'm after. But the increase in hops gives a lot more flavor. Yes, the volatile aromas boil off, but I still find a lot of flavor is imparted. Now that's possibly due to the thiols being released, which helps with biotransformation during fermentation, and it forms fruity aromas and tastes in the finished beer. I'm not an expert on that subject of thiols and biotransformation, and it could probably, I think, fill a video easily of its own. So I'm not going to dig myself any deeper hole here, and I'll leave it there. So the hops I'm going to put into this, into the 1 hour mash, are 40 grams of Centennial pellets, and that'll be an IBU of about 10.5. The second addition of hops will be at 10 minutes to go in the boil, and that'll be another 40 grams of pellets, giving an IBU of 19.5 this time. The last hops will be a whirlpool addition of 60 grams, and I'll whirlpool those for 15 minutes at 74 degrees Celsius or 165 Fahrenheit to give an IBU of 5.5. For the mash, I'll dough in at 40 degrees Celsius or 104 degrees Fahrenheit, and then raise the temperature up to 67 C or 152 F for a 1 hour mash. Then it'll be mashed out at 77 Celsius or 170 Fahrenheit, and that'll be a mash out for about 5 minutes or so. The boil on this, I'm going to do a 1 hour boil. And as for the water profile, well, it's just going to be a light, balanced, soft water profile. I think if you wanted the hops to be more emphasized, then I don't think upping the sulfates would be out of place in this, and putting a bit more gypsum in certainly wouldn't be an issue. So enough of the preamble, let's get out to the shed and let's get some grains milled. Okay, I was just putting these in and I realized I probably should say a little bit more about this. Generally, when using hops in the mash, use leaf hops. Leaf hops will stay in the grains, and in fact they can act a little bit like rice hulls, and they can prevent a stuck mash or a stuck sparge. But more importantly, if loads of your hops material gets out of your grains and into the wort, then the IBU that you thought you were going to get could actually end up being a whole lot higher, because all of those hops and that hops material is going to go through a full boil. The mash temperatures are not generally high enough to isomerize much of the alpha acids in the hops, but the boil will. So as you see in this video, I'm using pellets. Mostly that's simply because all I had was pellets. However, my filter screens, I've got one here, and you see it. They're really fine, and they do a good job of keeping all the hops in the grains. Anyway, enough said, back to the mash. And finally, here we are at the best part of any beer, the opening and the tasting. It's been a couple of weeks out in cold storage, so it should be reasonably well conditioned. So let's give it an open, see what it's like. So it looks good, it looks the right colour, and to be honest it looks a similar colour to Sierra Nevada Pale Ale as well. The question is, does it taste like Sierra Nevada Pale Ale, I guess? Let's see what it smells like first. The first two things that come straight to you is caramel and grapefruit. And in fact, the caramel is quite strong. Let's see how it tastes. And the two things that come through in the taste: caramel, quite strong, and grapefruit. The crystal malt in there, it's given a real body. There's quite a, I wouldn't say it's thick, but it's a real body to it, and it comes across as strong caramel flavored. Without the bitterness from the hops, it'd be too cloying. And Sierra Nevada Pale Ale is a lot like that as well. But the bitterness balances that and makes it really drinkable. The hops, rather than coming through as lemon type citrus, it really is quite strong grapefruit. It's almost like drinking pink grapefruit juice with sort of burnt sugar, toasted caramelized sugar on it. It's absolutely delicious. It's super clean as well, super clean, and a crispness to it. I know it's got quite a bit of body, but there's a sort of a crispness to the clean yeast effect, I suppose, from the SO5. That's a great beer. Considering I've just brewed this because I had too much of a hops, that is probably one of my, I think, favorite beers that I've brewed. It's refreshing, it's crisp, it's grapefruit. What would be interesting is getting some Sierra Nevada Pale Ale. And if we just hold on, I'm going to go get a can of that and let's try it. Right, I'm back. So let's see how this compares. Now, the different thicknesses of glass, which doesn't help for the comparison. To your view there, it looks a bit darker, but actually it's, if I look through the same thickness section of glass, actually the color is very, very similar. Smell wise, there's actually not that much aroma off the pale ale. And yet I get really strong grapefruit and caramel still coming through there. For what I usually think is a fairly hoppy and strong aroma beer, I'm surprised after that I'm not getting as much. So similar in that caramel comes through, and the hops, definitely there's citrus there, but definitely the Cascade is a little bit softer than the Centennial. And I have to say, after drinking this, the Sierra Nevada tastes a little bit stale. I'm sure Sierra Nevada don't make stale tasting beer, and perhaps it's maybe it's just a direct comparison from the crispness. Maybe it's that we're getting it over here in Scotland, and who knows how it's travelled. It could have gone through some fairly hot storage conditions on the way over. It's definitely not as clean as my ale. And the Centennial definitely it's really grapefruity, whereas this is a much softer citrus. And actually that's slightly more florally, which kind of makes sense with the Cascade. It's definitely a softer hops than the Centennial. They're similar, but actually I'm going to say I prefer that one. I know I'm probably biased because I've brewed it, but actually I think that's a nicer, cleaner, and more defined beer. The tastes in it are a little bit more defined. The sugary caramel definitely is more defined. The hops is more defined, and yet they're very balanced as well. This is still going to be one of my favorite beers for summer, but I'm sorry, Sierra Nevada, I think I may have pipped it with this one. I prefer that. So anyway, I hope you found this interesting. I certainly have. And now I've got 2 beers I've got to get through. That seems like a shame. Not to worry, I'll make my way through this. And I guess until next time, life's good. Drink more beer.